Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending our seminar today called The Best FundANeed That You Have Ever Done. My name is Trisha Brauer, and I am with Taking a Bid Fundraising, and excited to be here with my other host, Greg.
Hi, my name is Greg Turcotte, and I am the Director of Client Relations and Convention Services for HMXLive, and we love helping groups just like yours with their productions.
We really do, and that is one thing that Greg and I have in common is helping nonprofits in our area. And so we've put together this seminar series, and we hope that you're able to take away a few nuggets. And today what we're going to be talking about is the best FundANeed that you have ever done. Now, I realize that some of the things that Greg and I are going to share today, you may already know, but we're hoping that there are a few nuggets that you may take away from this today that you didn't consider before. And more importantly, just because we've been through such a weird 18 months, we need to revisit stuff that we actually did know because we're somewhat forgetting some of those things. You know, I equivocate this to my jewelry box. Greg, I went through my jewelry box for the first time in June. That I hadn't been into it since March the year before, and it was like brand new stuff. It was like brand new jewelry all over again. So we hope that same thing for you here today, that some of this is gonna be stuff you knew, but we're gonna dust it off and give it to you there again. So we're gonna talk about modern trends. We're gonna talk about how some things have changed since the beginning of 2020. We're gonna give you some tips of best practices and also some things to consider. Now, a few housekeeping things. Greg and I are up here. We know you are on Zoom. We actually can't read the chat right now. We don't have that good a vision to see our screens up there, but we do have Sadie online with us. She's gonna be monitoring that. We are gonna take Q&A at the end, so you're gonna be muted for now, but we are gonna allow you the opportunity to unmute yourself and ask those questions when we get to the end of today's presentation. So what's next?
Well, I pressed the button. I didn't press it hard enough, so there you go.
There you go, stuff happens. Okay, so let's talk about what the FundANeed is. For those of you who are new to your role or new to fundraising, FundANeed is an industry-specific term where we use that as part of a gala or fundraising event where simply we ask the guests in your crowd for a donation, but we do it in an active way. We don't do it in a passive way. A passive way would be like a note on the card or a note on the table where you fill it out and take it in. We do this where we specifically ask people to raise their bid cards and make that pledge right then and there during the event. So many things, this can be called many things. FundANeed, emotional appeal, gift from the heart. Sometimes folks will name it specific to their organization. So I used to help raise money for teddy bears, and it was fun to bear, you know, things like that. So whatever is good for your organization. But for today's purpose, we're gonna use FundANeed as our general terminology. So why should you do this? Now, the number one reason is that you want to give people and everyone there the opportunity to financially support your mission. They came to the event and they want to help, and the FundANeed is the opportunity for them to do so. So this can be done through the verbal ask, and it can also be used in conjunction with mobile technology of a giving site. Now, your organization does make our community a better place, and sharing the why behind this is so critical because that is how we get folks to support those causes, is sharing the why. Greg and I are both going to talk about that here in a little bit. So many of your donors, talking about the positive post-pandemic. Now, I kind of hate to say post-pandemic because we're still dealing with it, but regardless, the world has changed a little bit. Now, one thing that we're learning about how the last 18 months have impacted us financially. Now, unfortunately, a lot of folks were negatively impacted by COVID-19. But not everyone was. There are many folks, especially those individuals who are in a financial status where they can afford to spend, you know, the $50, the $100, $250, $500 to come to your event. Many of those groups were not negatively impacted by the pandemic. In many cases, they were actually positively impacted by the pandemic simply because they didn't have the opportunity to go spend money that they normally would. Therefore, right now in the United States, our savings accounts are higher than they were before 2019, which what that means for you is that people have money to give as a financial donation. And in addition, what we've learned about this post-pandemic is that giving and helping makes us feel good.
It does.
You know, you get that endorphin release, and folks want to help, and sometimes we don't know how. And simply saying, hey, you can help with a financial donation, people are like, I can do that, and they do it, and they feel good. Now, another thing that, a best practice or a thing that we talk about is tying that FundANeed to a tangible component within your mission. So it might be you can fund so many iPads, you can fund so many back-to-school lunches, you can fund so many hours of research, but I will say this is a deeper discussion for another day. There are some IRS considerations that go along with that, so you want to make sure that your tax professional is on board with whatever that messaging is. You can get around it. There are some workarounds it, but again, people want to know what their money is going to fund, and so that is why your FundANeed is so incredibly important.
Well, let's dive into getting ready for that FundANeed right before that ask or telling your story. So I want to ask the question, should you have that moment be led up to by a video or a speaker? So I'm just going to dive into some of those things. Regardless of what you pick, the number one complaint you don't want to have is, I couldn't hear. So let's look at how we enter some of those situations. Let's start with your venue. Maybe your venue has a natural echo. Maybe it's historic and the floor's all marble or limestone or something like that, and there's maybe columns that way too. Those are really reflective surfaces. It's going to create a lot of extra noise in your space. Or maybe you're doing an outdoor event and your venue that you love, it's by a highway and it's going to be really loud. So you might have to do something to combat, extra noise that could be distracting. So for those echoey, more live venues, instead of adding more speakers so that everybody can hear, a lot of times what we do when we go into a space like that is we treat the acoustics with drape or other props that are going to absorb the sound. You can't get rid of the echo all the way, but you can make it more pleasing to the ear and more intelligible for your audience. And then with noisy environments, this is a time we do add more speakers or get louder. Both options come with added budget because you're adding more stuff, but those are some techniques that we use to deal with those types of spaces. A lot of times you'll come into a space and there'll be something built in already, like a ceiling speaker system. And ceiling speaker systems were not designed to host these FundANeed moments. If your audience has been drinking or if they're prone to conversation, like this is the one time a year they get to see each other and they're going to be talking, those ceiling speakers, although it's convenient and inexpensive, they're just not loud enough to get over the roar of an audience talking. So what we usually use are line array systems. And I'm going to show you a photo of a line array in a little bit. I know that may be a technical term that not everybody knows, but basically it's a bunch of speakers stacked on top of each other where the bottom speaker points at the front row, the middle speakers point at the middle of the audience, and the top speakers point at the back of the audience. The volume level of those speakers can be adjusted so that everybody hears the same volume level the whole time. The sound sounds like it's coming from the stage, and it's a much more engaging experience than to have sound coming from overhead that may not be loud enough or you're straining to try to hear it. So elevating those line arrays, elevating those speaker systems are a very good thing. It helps cover more evenly. You may see in some locations speakers placed around the perimeter of a ballroom, and while that may be good from, I'm not using the ceiling speakers, but I've set out these speakers, what happens in those scenarios is that the sound starts coming from the side or behind your audience, and so it's distracting their attention from the stage where the ask is happening. The other thing that happens when you have those speakers around in a circle is now you have cables everywhere that can be trip hazards for your wait staff or even your guests trying to go to the bathroom. So having the speakers by the stage elevated is just a more pleasant experience, both from a audio standpoint and from just a safety of your guest standpoint. So this is one of my favorite acoustically challenging places. This is the Little Theater at the Convention Center, and I just love it because of the Art Deco vibe and just look at the way the floor and the detail on the wall sconces. But doing an event in there is very echoey. So when we have meetings in there, when we have events in there, a lot of times we're putting up drape in places that will treat the acoustics but not ruin the vibe of the event. Let's look at another. This is the line array that I was going to show you. So you can kind of see the big boxes that are on the left and right side hanging from the ceiling. See how they're making a curve? Each one of those speakers is individually controlled, and the angle can be adjusted depending on how your seating is, and they're nice up high right by the ceiling so that we're covering the whole audience. There's some other venues in town that have speaker systems besides ceiling speakers that you kind of have to look out for too. Some venues, and this trends towards smaller venues, and they use home theater speakers. And a lot of times home theater speakers are great for playing your video where there's deep bass and you can hear everything and it's, you know, like a theatrical experience. But when you start plugging microphones into those systems, they just don't sound as good. So that's a challenge there. And Trisha, I'm sure you get this one a lot. Well, you can just use the band sound system or the DJ sound system.
Yes, I get that quite a bit. And again, that sound system is perfect for the band. It is perfect for the DJ, but it is not perfect for me, and you explained it so well today, and the reason for that is because...
Well, a lot of times those band sound systems are focused solely on the dance floor, but you need to get past the dance floor. You need to get in all those tables. You need to get to the last table in the room. So a sound system that's just focused for the dance floor really just doesn't cut it in those scenarios.
Yeah. It's, you know, and the reason why we wanted to talk about sound is that, you know, there's so much work that goes into your fundraising event, and if they can't hear and if they can't see, they're not going to pay attention. And that's where you lose your audience there. And if they're not paying attention, you know, they're not going to be engaged. And if they're not engaged, they're not going to be, you know, figuring out how to give you their money. And so that's why sound is so important. And when I'm working with clients, I always say, you know, in order of spending money, sound should be number one. It's going to be, you know, a return on value, even before me. And I'm pretty biased about myself on that one. So let's talk about, should you have a live in-person speaker, or should you use a video? And so there's different reasons for both, but there also can be some considerations with both of those as well. So first off, having a person there who's on stage delivering their story, it is an emotional connection and it is an emotional experience, and it can be a strong bond with the audience there. And that is one of the main reasons why you would want to consider having an in-person there who's there giving you that information right to the audience. Now, here's some considerations with that. The first component is the vast majority of people are scared to death of public speaking. I haven't looked it up in a while, but I think the number one phobia still over dying is still public speaking.
Yeah, for sure.
And so here's the situation that you have. You have a person, and most of the time when they're sharing their story, they're coming from a place of being vulnerable. So not only are you putting them in front of a large group of people, which to some people, anything more than 3 is a large group. It's all relative. They're now scared to death, and now they're having to share this vulnerable story. That's not a recipe for success for most people. It just truly isn't. So they can have the best story in the entire world, but they just may not be the best way to present that story is telling it in person in front of all those folks. And so that can be a challenge for it. Now, you are going to want to know that in addition to having a live speaker, your auctioneer, the person who does the actual ask, matters. That person should be trained in the art of asking, should be trained in emotional specific language, should understand transitions, and should more importantly understand how to not kill the momentum. I've seen it, unfortunately, not only with auctioneers, I've seen it with other folks as well, is that there's this wonderful speaker who shares this great story, and the audience is all queued up. Maybe they're crying, they're laughing, they're showing the emotion, whatever it is, and then all of a sudden, the person who's supposed to do the ask launches into their own personal story. And that is such a momentum killer right there. You should know what's going to come out of that person's ask. It shouldn't be a surprise on that. You don't want anybody to steal that thunder from the person who just shared their very emotional and vulnerable experience. Okay, so, no, you're right. So let's talk about You know, if you're gonna have a live person, let's talk about some tips and some considerations to make it the most impactful experience. So first off is you need to coach your speakers, regardless of who they are. They could be a CEO with tons of experience or a young child who doesn't have any experience. My guess is that for the vast majority of the people, that putting them in the environment of a FundANeed presentation is not the typical presentation that they are used to giving. You should coach them. Now, for my company, that is a service that we provide. We can work with them to make sure that they are ready and understand the difference between giving a traditional speech or presentation and what that looks like for an emotional appeal. One tip, please, 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 if there's anything you take away today, do not let your FundANeed speaker wing it. That is one thing that scares the bejesus out of me when somebody said, when I'm like, oh, you all ready oh, I'm just gonna speak from the heart. I know my story. Oh, you do. But do you know how to tell it in the most effective way? Because you're gonna need to practice that. So my recommendation and consideration with this is that your FundANeed speakers should submit in written format their FundANeed speech to you, the executive director, development director, whomever you are handling this, a minimum of 2 weeks before the event. If they can't do that, they're not a good fit for the FundANeed because it needs to be taken that seriously. This is the biggest, most impactful component of the night, and it needs to be treated as such. It's the biggest opportunity that you have. So get them to practice it 2 weeks beforehand, and then in addition to that, so that gets all the language smoothed out, it gets make sure the messaging is on point, it eliminates any hiccups that you may have or anything that sounds awkward or funny. Now, the date of the event, this is where Greg's gonna come in here in a second, is you want to practice the day of the event at the venue, on the stage, and with a microphone. So, Greg, when it comes to a FundANeed speaker, what type of microphone do you recommend and why?
Yeah, you know, I really prefer the podium mic. I know that may seem like not as glamorous, but it gives the presenter a lectern to hold on to, and that microphone there, it's not attached to their body. They don't have to worry about something uncomfortable or remembering to hold a handheld up to their mouth. And if they start to drift or walk away, they can hear their volume go lower, and so they can stay right there. Or even if they have to have note cards or something, everything's right there, and it's connected to the sound system. You know it's going to work. I would say my second favorite is probably the handheld, just because you can get it up to your mouth and get it really loud, especially in those acoustically challenging environments. Having the microphone element as close to the presenter's mouth as possible is going to give the audio engineer the most to work with to make it intelligible for the room. If they really have to be wireless because there's no lectern and they're going to walk around, the over-the-ear mic that comes down and puts the element right by their mouth. You know, people don't like things on their face or people to touch their face or neck, but that's going to be your best bet. The microphone I would stay away from at all costs is the lavalier mic. And I know we're both using lavalier mics today, but we're not in a loud room. We don't have to worry about feedback. There's no speakers pointed back at us. Lavalier mics are really challenging, and a lot of times you can't even get them as loud as you need to get them. So, especially in those acoustically challenging environments. But, so I guess the lectern mic, even though it's not glamorous, is my favorite, followed by the handheld.
Yeah, and that is, even myself, you've been watching me now on screen I'm a hand talker. And I'm like that on stage too, and I've really had to learn how to hold that microphone still. And I see that with a lot of speakers, that they start doing what they're doing and they don't know how to keep that microphone to their chin. So that's a great solution there. Now, Greg, beforehand when we were getting ready for this presentation, you actually gave a tip that I thought was incredibly valuable that, you know, I hadn't thought about before, but that is the speaker to record themselves, just themselves, and to watch it, which is public speaking 101, but talk about why that's the best practice.
Yeah, I really like using Zoom. We're on Zoom today. We're used to using Zoom. Zoom has a record feature. Just record yourself And it helps with making eye contact with the camera. I always tell people to practice making eye contact with the camera. But when you watch yourself back, which you're right, is challenging, you can count how many ums or uhs, or maybe there's a repeated word that happens several times, and you can kind of drill down and make your presentation or your speech a lot more concise. So just by watching yourself back. So.
Absolutely, and if you are going to be delivering such a meaningful speech, that is a tip that you're going to want to take advantage of. Now, another best practice, and again, a positive outcome of the pandemic that we've seen is that you can do a couple of things where it doesn't have to be an or also necessarily. So we've talked about having the speaker in person, we've talked about a video, but you can actually marry the two together. You can have a speaker there who's on stage giving their story, presenting their testimony, but also be playing a slideshow behind them. So for example, we've got the LED screen behind us. There could be a slideshow of pictures or infographics, data, different things like that, that could be adding another layer to the storytelling that you couldn't just get from the dynamics of a person delivering that speech there in person. In addition to that, you can also do remote speakers now. And while that's always been a capability, or at least it has been for quite some time, the pandemic taught us to not be so scared about it. And so if you do have a dynamic speaker who isn't there, who can't make it, maybe they're a person who utilized your services but then moved, but they still want to be a part of their event, you can do a remote speech with them and pipe them into it with those AV capabilities. And that is a great way to also bring in somebody who would be a great presenter but may not be able to be in the room as well.
Well, that kind of leads into the video screen itself. So let's talk about the video itself, and then we'll go back to looking at venues like I did with the sound system. So we heard about the great benefits of having that live presenter there and the ability to connect with your audience. The great thing about having a video play before the ask is that you can really craft that story. You can spend time in the editing process making sure that story arc is just perfect. And I mentioned the story arc at our last presentation, so you guys can check that video out for more information there. But you know, your clients the people who have used your services, now they get a chance to, if they're telling their story and they want to work on something or record a different part, now you have the freedom to do so by making this video. The other thing that kind of enhances the story is music or photos. You can add slideshows to these videos, or even B-roll, like if it's a property, you have a building and you want to show the different areas of it. Now you can do that as part of this video presentation.
Yeah, and that just evokes emotion, you know, and I want to jump in really quick, Greg, because so in addition to doing this for my career, I also in 2018 was a FundANeed video for a nonprofit that I'm involved in. And so I went through the process of sharing our story through video storytelling. And even though I speak publicly for a living, I can tell you right now that there is no way that I could have gotten on stage and shared that story, because even like thinking about it, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so much meaningful to me. I get choked up, I get teary, and that interferes with my ability to share that story really well. And so the video allowed us, and we were able to show pictures that, again, it just drove that point home. So from a personal standpoint, Greg, you know, I can tell you that video can really take a lot of pressure off the person who's sharing their story. It can make them feel more comfortable with it. And again, adding those other mediums really just drives that story home. So thank you for letting me jump in right there.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I want to talk about video cons, and not necessarily negative video considerations, because these aren't necessarily bad things. You do need to budget for your video to be made. Even if you're having a volunteer make it for you for free, they're going to spend time on that. You need to allot a certain amount of time for that video to be made. So your basic talking head interview video could cost in between $3,000 to $5,000, depending on how you're getting that done. So just be prepared that you can spend that amount of money very fast on a very simple scope of work. And you could even spend $10,000 or more on a video if you have multiple shoots. Maybe you have to shoot in this location and then go to that location, or have different presenters, or even if you have a lot of data, if you have charts or or things that have to animate because you're telling a story through animation, you can really spend a lot of money that way. But as long as you're telling that story and it's coming across and you can afford to do so, then it is money well spent. So that money that you spend for that video, now that video has a shelf life. So that investment is only good for a certain amount of time. And maybe that investment is a video for the year. This is our yearly video, and it's going to have the ask as part of it, or the lead up to the ask as part of it. Or maybe it's just this event. It's only this event. It's very specific and made just for that one event. Just ask yourself, can this video be reused? And you shouldn't focus so much on the, hey, I have to make this video reusable. Just understand that if it's not reusable, you're okay with that. And if it is reusable, great. And then I mentioned we were going to talk about venues. Does your venue have a screen or some sort of built-in system, or are you hiring a production vendor like us to come bring a screen to you? And some of those venues with screens built in, you want to find out if they're going to have a technician or somebody to help you hit play when it's time to play that video. And my one recommendation to not ever do is to play your video from YouTube or from the internet in general. You want to play it from the computer that you're going to play the video on, have that file. Before you uploaded it to YouTube, it existed as a file somewhere. So make sure you save that into a place that when it comes time for your event, you can actually get to it. And then I showed you my favorite venue with acoustic challenges, the Little Theater at the Convention Center. I'm going to show you another Convention Center room. This is my favorite ballroom with windows. There's a handful of other ballrooms here in Kansas City with windows. They're all beautiful and great, but this view looking south over the Kauffman Center and downtown is just so awesome. And so many groups want to use it, but if you're not prepared to spend the money on having an LED wall in place, the sun is going to wash out any projection screen you put into that room. So here's a photo. It's the middle of the day, and you can see this example of the LED wall. It's coming through nice and bright.
Yeah, and that looks great too. And Greg, I know that one challenge that we often forget, but does play into this, is the time of year and when the sun sets, because you may go look at the venue and sign your contract in January, and you win at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and at 4 o'clock in the afternoon in January, the room was dim, but your event is in August. Well, in 7 o'clock in August versus 7 o'clock in January is gonna be a very different feeling in the room, and so that's another thing, and why those LED, make sure that you don't have any issues with that. So
yeah, absolutely.
It's funny the weird things you learn in this job. The sun setting, plays into this. So let's talk about the qualities of a good video. So Greg, again, you're the video guru, the tech guy. Tell us about what makes a good video here.
I keep going back to that storyline. You want to tell a story. You want to be able to have a clear, concise message in as little amount of time as possible, which I always get asked the question, how long should my video be? And I like to tell people 3 to 5 minutes. It's not really about that. It's really about getting that story told. I will say on the other side of that, having a longer video is really challenging because you can lose people's attention very quickly. Even when I'm watching, we were talking about just sitcoms. A 30-minute sitcom is really 22 minutes of actual content.
Yeah.
I'm checking my phone the whole time during that. And so you just don't want your audience on their phone. So as short as you can make that video. And going back to the budget, I shared some pricing numbers, and regardless of your video vendor, those numbers are going to flex, but those are rough numbers. But sometimes the shorter you make your video, the more expensive your video project gets, because now they're trying to take your story and tell it in a shorter amount of time, which means really strategic cuts and thinking and strategy. So you really have to spend a lot of time focusing on what that outcome is going to be, and sometimes that equates to more money. I said focusing on the story. It always comes back to that. You want to be able to hear the story. You want to be able to see the story. You want to be able to pay attention to the story. And I always like to add in, like, why are we funding this cause? That's what this video is. Why are we going to support your organization? And so while you're doing that, the other tip that I would say is avoid using jargon. Maybe your organization has multiple programs and those programs have abbreviations. You might have people in the audience that don't know what the difference between all those things are. So avoiding that will help you tell a more clear story.
Greg, I actually have a funny example of that. It was for an educational program, and they kept talking about the DOA, which was the Director of Admissions. And I had a police officer come up to me afterwards. Do you know what DOA stands for in the police officer's world? Dead on arrival. And so he kept saying, why were they talking about dead on arrival in this education video? And they weren't. So again, remember that sometimes that jargon doesn't translate the same across industries either.
Right.
And so you want to make sure that anybody because a lot of your audience comes as a guest of someone, so they aren't privy to your mission. And I know that's somewhat of a bummer, and it's not always something we like to talk about, but it is true that people show up and they're there because somebody invited them, and they want to be there to support their friend who invited them, but they really don't know a lot about your mission. So this is an opportunity for you to convey that message, but you have to do it in a way that they understand. So that's a tip for you. All right. Now, another thing that I would like to talk about for a few moments is marketing your FundANeed. Now, I'm a person who comes from fundraising from a standpoint of eliminating surprises as much as possible. I know that surprises can be fun, but for the most part, the vast majority of people, especially at least for the fundraisers that I do, I don't do fundraisers where they're super affluent crowds, where people are showing up, in Bentleys and, Bugattis and whatnot. Like, they're just average people like me. And we can't handle financial surprises really more than a couple $100. We have to think about it. We have to plan for it. We have to take into considerations for it. And so try to eliminate financial surprises, and that includes your FundANeed. Don't be afraid to tell people a FundANeed is going to be part of your program, and use your social media platforms and your e-communication platforms. Use your board of directors, your committees, your volunteers, your staff to talk about the FundANeed leading up to the event, because you should be planning people and putting those seeds in their mind that they need to come prepared to give a financial gift, and give them the reasons why for it. So a couple of things you want to mention beforehand. It's good to talk about your various levels of FundANeed and what that money can go to help fund. Now, again, remember, the IRS, talk to your tax professional. That's my disclaimer right there, because I'm not a CPA. But aside from that, another thing is encourage people to use other avenues in their life to help with fundraising. So, for example, if individuals work for someone else, especially if they work for a larger corporation, a corporate match is common as an employee benefit, but a lot of people forget that. You go to orientation in the first week, they go through the whole list of stuff, and you totally forget that your employer will match your once a year philanthropic donation up to a certain amount of dollars. So for example, my last corporate America job would match up to $250 and give me 8 hours off of community service per year. So if somebody reminded me of that, I could actually come to your event prepared to give you a $500 donation, or if they reimburse $100, I could come with a $200 or a $250 donation. So remind those folks. Also, plant the seed of, reaching out to their friends and their family who may not be able to attend the event, but if your friends and family are supporters of missions like that, say, hey, I'm going to this event, would you chip in $50? And they're gonna do this thing called a FundANeed, and I really wanna raise my paddle at $500 or $1,000, can you throw in $50 or $25 and help me get there so we can make a larger gift together as a family or as a community? And folks will do it. And so again, don't be afraid to talk about that beforehand and remind people how they can best help you. All right, a couple of other best practices, and Greg, you can chime in.
Yeah, absolutely.
On some of these as well. So the first one here that I have, of course, I'm incredibly biased, but it is use a benefit auctioneer specialist. And I equivocate this to a healthcare professional, Greg, because when you have a heart condition, you see a cardiologist. When you have, an issue with your teeth, you go to the dentist, and so on and so forth, and there afterwards. And the same thing goes with auctioneers. And, I Could I go sell cars or livestock or real estate? I mean, I could, but I'm not gonna be the best person for it because I don't understand that asset class like somebody who lives in it day in and day out. And the same goes for your fundraising event. I'm a fundraising auctioneer. I'm a benefit auctioneer specialist. So when it comes to the FundANeed, I have studied ad nauseum because I love it so incredibly much, the impact of emotional language, how to use silence, how to use direct eye contact, all the things that I do on stage, all the way from my glitter microphone to my tambourines, to the pauses, to the eye contact, to the thank you, thank you, thank you. That is all designed on purpose. None of that is by accident. And so you want somebody that knows how to effectively make that ask. Now, Greg, one thing that you and I talked about beforehand was, when do you do the FundANeed? When does it take place? Now, this is something we had a little bit longer conversation with, but I'll summarize it here for a few minutes, is that there's no straight answer, because everybody always wants me to tell them, do you do it at the beginning? Do you do it at the end? Do you do it in the middle? And the answer is, I don't know. There needs to be more of an event analysis that's done. But when I learned, actually, when I was learning to become an auctioneer, I was trained, you do the FundANeed at the end, because if they didn't give you money in the silent auction or the live auction or the raffle, they're gonna give it to you in the FundANeed. And our data, through years of studying this, has now proven that to be a myth. It is false. Now, there's a whole nother reason for that I can get into on any given day. Give me a call, I'll talk your ear off about it because I love it so much. The reality is their rear end needs to be in the seat, and they need to be engaged, and they need to be paying attention. So there's a whole lot of variables that come into that, because timing is critical, but saving it till the very end, it breaks my heart when I've done FundANeeds way too late in the evening, and I always know when it's gonna happen. I always know when it's gonna happen. If you are doing a FundANeed after 8:45 at night, you are most likely losing money. People are done. They're tired, they're ready, that or they're too intoxicated and they're not paying attention anymore, which is another issue. So folks, you want that a little bit earlier than that. I also get asked, how many levels should we have, or where should we start? Now, I can't tell you where to start. Again, that's a deeper conversation I'm happy to have with anybody offline, but I can tell you that you really don't want to have more than 6 levels of giving. The reason for that being is that the pie is only so big, and you've just now really started slicing the pie into smaller pieces. It takes longer, it drags out, and it's an uncomfortable experience for your guests, and you don't want them to feel uncomfortable during the FundANeed. You want them to feel empowered, and you want them to feel generous. And so wherever you start, I always say the rule of thumb is to half it to the dollar amount that makes the most sense after there. And you don't have to do round numbers, folks. That's another thing that I always tell people. Is we used to do round numbers, Greg, because it made sense, because we carried cash. You know, we lived in a cash society, but we live in a cashless society now. So it doesn't matter if your FundANeed level, you know, is $116, because that's how much it costs to fund 1 day of education at the school. You can make it $116, that's fine. But then you don't want your next level to be $100. It's just too close. So generally you want to do a rule of half. So if you start at 1,000, go 500 and then 250. Half of that would be 125. You can keep it there. You can make it around 100 if that makes sense. Now, the final thing, and then Greg, I'm going to toss it off to you at this one, is that your interaction with the audience and tone is very critical. When it comes to asking people for money, you are asking them to part with the thing that they leave their house for every day, that they well, at least they did before the pandemic. Now we're doing it at home, but you get my point, right? But you're asking them for something very, very personal. And so you need to do that with a place of gratitude and doing it with a point of understanding that this isn't me guilting you into this. This isn't me trying to make you feel shame for not doing this or embarrassing you in front of your friends. Those are negative tactics. You want to come from a place of compassion and understanding and positivity, because people will react to that way more in way such favor, especially for the long term of coming back to your event and continuing to give, than a place from negativity. And so, Greg, I know that this all leads into sound, and so how does that play into this?
Well, when you're trying to drive that emotion, when you're telling your story and trying to empower the audience, you're trying to engage with them and speak to them at a place they can understand. If they can't hear you, all of that effort is just lost. And so a lot of times, you know, like you were saying, timing that FundANeed when people are paying the most attention, the most focused on what's happening on the stage, is so critical. And even when we were in the season of all virtual events, timing that FundANeed when the audience was paying attention because we knew we only had so much time. Again, just critical. Really focus on when and that people are going to actually be able to hear you.
Yeah, and it really does come back down to folks being able to hear you. I would like to think that the partnership that I have with HMXLive and, you know, using a professional auctioneer, that we work so well together. We really work in harmony together because, you know, I need him, or I need, you know, somebody who's skilled at this, because it's not me. Those of you who have worked with me know this, but folks need to hear, because at the end of the day, if they can't hear, the effort is going to be lost. And so make that investment because it is going to pay off in the long term. If anything, for a better guest experience, because you want your guests leaving feeling positive and that they had fun, and you don't want them leaving being like, well, I couldn't hear anything. What was that all about? So I think we're gonna start to wrap it up. A couple of things that I'd like to say. So first off, we hope that you all are enjoying us talking, but you see each other there. Don't be afraid to like reach out to somebody who you don't know and say, hi, I know we probably haven't met, but my name, I see Ruth on the thing, so I'm gonna say hi to Ruth right now. There, she's smiling. Say, hi, I'm Ruth, and I'm with Friends of St. Anne, and I just wanna say hi. Share contact information, because you all do this day in and day out. We're great sources of information, but you all are great sources of information, and we hope that you can take the community that we're working to build here and use it to broaden your world. And so as we're kind of wrapping up here, if you have any questions, go ahead and just type question in the chat box, because then what Sadie is going to do for us, she's going to unmute them, right?
They can unmute themselves,
They can unmute themselves.
Yep.
Look at Sadie. Sadie's our tech pro back there, rocking it. Couldn't do this without her. So if you've got a question, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, let Sadie know in the chat. She'll introduce you, and then we'll talk to you.
There we go. So any final thoughts, Greg, as we get some questions coming in?
No, we just really appreciate everybody attending this session, and I'm looking forward to some questions.
Okay, let's see what we got.
Well, we do have a question from Ruth. Ruth, if you want to unmute your microphone, you can go right ahead.
Okay. Thank you for the information, first of all. It's been very helpful. But looking at costs associated with some of your recommendations, especially those wonderful speakers and the speaker system, do you have a ballpark figure on what that kind of setup would cost?
I do have some numbers off the top of my head. A lot of times it's just based off of what venue, depending on what venue you're in, will require different amounts of equipment. But we basically, internally here at HMXLive, we base that fee off of the number of people that are in your audience. So, you know, it could be anywhere from a couple $1,000s to tens of thousands of dollars, just kind of depending on, you know, how many people are in your audience. So, and your venue. So are you at the school, or?
No, their school's actually in Kenya.
Well, our school is in Kenya.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, but we have events here. We've been working with Trisha for a number of years now. And it's just that we're very small. And maybe 150 guests initially, I mean, is where we're at right now. But I think we've been relatively successful. So this helps a lot, because we keep looking at, we're at one level and we know we need to go up to the next level, and how are we going to do that, and where are the funds going to come from? And so those are the sorts of things we're working on. So I really appreciate all your information.
Yeah. Well, and what I would just say for you, as long as your speakers are up high enough so that they're coming over the audience heads, you don't have to have a big, complicated line array system. You could do that with regular speakers, but just make sure the sound's coming from the front of the room to your audience, that the speakers are up high enough, and you'll be fine. For 150 people, you'll be fine with a setup like that.
Well, in a lot of, you know, and Ruth, this speaks to you, but also to anyone else out there who may be a smaller client. And Ruth, I know that that's how you all define yourselves, as a smaller one. Don't be afraid to ask the question. I've actually been very surprised. And again, this is not my business, but I've been very surprised that when you do sit down, because a lot of times we come up with stuff in our own heads of what we think it's going to be. You know, like we talked about Nordstrom personal shoppers when we were together last time. I always thought there was a fee for a Nordstrom personal shopper. I'm like, there's no way I could afford this. And then I find out it's a service that they provide. I'm like, oh, okay. We make those assumptions in our head. And so I'm just saying that don't be afraid to ask the question and talk about what your needs are, because more than likely, if you've never had that conversation, you might end up being very surprised at what the answers to your questions really are.
It's like someone once told me, don't be afraid to ask the questions. You know, the answer may be no, but you'll never get an answer if you don't ask the question.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Do we have anyone else, Sadie?
Not at the moment, but if anyone wants to step up, I'd be happy to introduce them.
I have a question.
There we go.
Go for it. Yeah, go for it.
You have very good points about the live speaker versus a video. Do you think that having both is too much in one event?
I think, well, you go first.
Okay, so the answer to that is, if you're talking about a video and a speaker to set up the FundANeed only, yes. Because ultimately, after about 3 to 4 minutes, your audience attention span begins to diminish. And so therefore, I wouldn't necessarily recommend both to set up the FundANeed. I do believe that there's a way, because the program, you want to sprinkle in your mission moments and your storytelling throughout your program. And so I do believe that there's a way where you can utilize both. But from that transition of whenever the setup and just the specific setup, I think it should be one or the other again. But if you're using that video behind to accent your speaker, you can do that. That's a great question. Did I answer it?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Now I want Greg to share his thoughts.
Pretty much what you just said. Like if you play the video, you do the ask, the FundANeed's over, and now you have somebody that is a speaker who gets up there and tells their story about how that FundANeed benefited them. So you could have them go after, but you're right. The setup, it's just one or the other. But yeah, if you want somebody to share their story from the stage, you don't have to exclude them from the program. You're just putting them somewhere else.
Yeah. That's a great question as well. Thank you. Do we have anyone else? Well, we have got another seminar coming up. Tell them when it is, Greg.
It's September 7th at 2 p.m. and we're going to discuss the RFP process. I know that's a really exciting topic, but it's something that is painful for a lot of people. Yeah. It's painful for you as the person who needs services from vendors, and to be honest, it's painful for vendors because a lot of times, you know, they're not all formatted the same way, and sometimes they don't have budgets and things like that, and or just it's not consistent is the point, and so it's really frustrating, and we're going to talk about it on September 7th at 2 p.m.
Actually, and one thing, if you want to mark off your calendar, the first Tuesday of every month at 2 o'clock until the end of the year, Greg and I are going to be doing a seminar like this of some various topics. I didn't print. We've got our list decided. I just don't remember what they all are.
We'll get them out to everybody.
Yeah, but we'll get them out to you. So we're going to be doing that. And again, we encourage you to sign up, because even if you're not able to attend live, we'll get you the recording, and then you can listen to it as you're doing other work or driving down the road or whatever the case may be. And we also encourage you to connect with us via social media. I'm on LinkedIn. That's my preferred professional one, so you can find me there.
There's our contact information.
Yep, there's all of our contact information. Check out our websites. I know that I have a blog that you can sign up for on ours, so if you want to check that out, check out the HMXLive website as well. And if you have any questions after this, call, text, email, get a plane, skyride it.
I'm good with whatever. Yeah, my cell phone number is right on there.
And so he responds very quickly on that one. I can vouch for that one. So any final thoughts?
No. Again, just thank you guys so much for attending.
Thank you. It was great.
See you next time.
Great for having you. Thank you.
Bye.